Good afternoon, and welcome once again to the continuing speakers series at the College of Law at the University of Saskatchewan. My name is Brent Cotter, and I'm the chair of the Speakers Committee at the Law School, and it is a great pleasure, a really great pleasure to bring to you the Wanisway Lecture this week, sponsored by the Honorable Gerald Morin. Today we have a real treat for you. But let me begin, if I may, by acknowledging that as we gather here today, we acknowledge we are on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis, a particularly significant recognition today with a special guest speaker and leader of the Métis community speaking to you today. We pay our respect to the First Nations and Métis ancestors of this place and reaffirm our relationship to one another. As I say, a great opportunity, an extension to all of you of welcome, and a wonderful opportunity to hear from Jean Teillet, a friend to many of us, and a significant leader and a wise voice from the perspective of Métis people across this country, a significant and honorable legal scholar and litigation champion of Métis people. I won't say more on that beyond welcome you, because I want to now invite Dominga Robinson to introduce the guest speaker, following which Professor Jamie Lavallee will moderate the session and field questions and answers for our guest speaker, questions at least. I think Jean will do the answering, and I will wrap things up at the end with a thank you. So Dominga, can I call upon you to introduce our guest speaker today? Thanks.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Ms. Teillet is an author, treaty negotiator, women's rights advocate, and an Indigenous rights litigator. She has appeared at the Supreme Court of Canada 12 times in Indigenous rights cases. Ms. Teillet's popular history book, The Northwest is Our Mother, the story of Louis Riel's people, the Métis Nation, was one of the Globe and Mail's top 100 books of 2019 and won the Carol Shields and the Manitoba Day Awards. She is the author of Métis Law in Canada and has written for academic journals, the Globe and Mail and Macleans. A frequent speaker throughout Canada and internationally, Jean has been awarded the highest honor of her people, the Order of the Métis Nation. The Indigenous Bar Association has awarded Jean its highest honor, Indigenous Peoples Counsel. She has 3 honorary doctorates from the University of Guelph, Windsor University, and the Law Society of Ontario. Jean is an honorary lifetime member of the Ontario Association of Ontario Midwives. She is a member of the Manitoba Metis Federation and is the great grandniece of Louis Riel. Please help me welcome Jean.
Thank you, Dominga and Brent. It's a real honor to be here today. I know that we've spoken about my 2 books, The Northwest is Our Mother and Métis Law in Canada. And I'm gonna, if I can, share my screen and try and give you whether you're actually seeing my slide show.
That looks great, Jean.
Okay, great. Thanks, Brent. All right, so I'm going to give you, in fact, some glimpses into the laws and governance of the historic Métis Nation. And for those of you who have looked at my 2 books, nothing that I tell you today is in either of them. One of the things that happened while I was writing Métis Law in Canada is I actually started to think lately that it should be retitled, because it's not really Métis Law, it's really Canadian law about the Métis is really what it is, although that's a clunky title. And The Northwest is Our Mother, when I was writing it, I kept coming across these amazing glimpses into Métis law and Métis governance. But the problem was that, perhaps not for this audience, but is a little too law geeky for the regular people out there who want to read popular history. So I didn't put any of these things into the story, but I wanted to start to talk about them. I think I could have written The Northwest is Our Mother entirely as, say, following the law and how the law tangled up the Métis people from 1815 on. There's court cases, dozens and dozens of them, royal commissions, law, everything the Métis did irritated Canada and the colonial government. And so they're wrapped up in the law in a way that's really quite fascinating. But it's also true that there are glimpses of what their laws were like and the way they thought. So one of the things that I found fascinating is how much everybody seems to hate the Métis all the way down the line. So here's Lord Selkirk. It's pretty hard to get any more racist or condescending than that statement. So, you know, they're bastard sons of others, right? Not us, right? They've thrown off the restraints of regular society, which is fascinating considering that this is 1812 and the regular society there would actually be First Nations and Métis, because the Selkirk settlers had only arrived 2 years before. The denigrating description of Indian women, and then of course the fact that they're combining the vices of civilized and savage life. Well, that's how the Canadian law has thought and pretty much treated the Métis throughout the 19th century and for much of the 20th century. So what's happening here, one of the glimpses I wanted to show you is some of the documents that are in the historic record that show the organization of the Métis and how they were working. So take a look at the bottom, first of all, the 4 chiefs of the half Indians by the mutual consent of their fellows. So that indicates a lot of organization already, that they are organized, they're selecting or creating or acknowledging chiefs. There's 4 of them. That's interesting too. Now, we don't know who the 4 exactly are, except that one of them for sure is Cuthbert Grant. Now this, let me tell you the backstory to this Articles of Agreement. So what's happening here is the Selkirk settlers have arrived in August of 1812. So this is just shy of 3 years later. And immediately the Selkirk settlers arrived. They claim that they own the land. They claim that they now have all the ability to make rules about who can access lands and resources. And so they immediately start to take over all of that and this is in Red River. So Red River Indian Territory, right? Forks Red River. So Red River, of course, is not just where at the Forks. It goes as far west as about Capel, goes down into Minnesota, North Dakota. It's not just the river, it's all of the land around the Red River. So what's happened is the Selkirk settlers arrive and then they start saying, oh, you can't do this, you can't fish here, you can't hunt here, you can't run buffalo, you can't do, you know, the list is quite lengthy. And it starts as an annoyance, it gets irritating, and then the Métis have had enough. And they decide to start pushing the Selkirk settlers out. So you see in the first paragraph there, all settlers to retire immediately from this river and no appearance of a colony to remain, right? So you guys are going to get out of here. Now, this is the part of a negotiation with Colin Robertson, and they are trying to keep the settlers in, but they still want to keep their ability to make laws. And that is where the Métis draw the line. They say, no, we reject the premise. You don't get to come in here and make all the laws and keep us from accessing the resources here. So they want them to go, and they want them to go immediately. Now they're allowed, if you see in the third paragraph, they'll let you come in to trade, right? But you can't live here and you can't make laws. So this is an interesting document that is showing the Métis acting on their own actions, right? Their own motivations. This is not the Northwest Company dictating. This is the Métis themselves taking action to protect their interests. And this is quite interesting because this is a full year before the Battle of Seven Oaks, which they used to call the Massacre of Seven Oaks. So this is a full year before, showing you what's going on in Red River. So I find it quite interesting the way they're acting, and that they're acting as a collective, that they're acting in their own interests, and they've got leaders. So this is the Métis Laws of the Hunt. Now I was able to put this in the book, and this is quite famous, the Laws of the Hunt. So you can see what they are. I just want to direct your attention, because I don't have an awful lot of time, but to the very last bullet about theft. So you see there that any person convicted of theft, even to the value of a sinew, to be brought to the middle of the camp, and the crier to call out his or her name 3 times, adding the word thief at each time. All right, so this is public shaming, right? That's what is going on here. That's the punishment. Now, this is really serious stuff, because if you are not trusted, then you would not be allowed in these camps after that. And that would mean you have no access to buffalo, which is the primary protein source for everybody at this time. And so the word would spread like wildfire all across the prairies. So they can't afford to have people in the camp who are stealing from them, because people have to go off chasing the buffalo. They can't have somebody back watching their goods or their food or your horse or your spare gun or anything like that. You have to have trust in the camp. So this is really interesting laws that everybody who comes into the camp immediately agrees to abide by the Métis Laws of the Hunt. Now, these were known for decades and decades and decades. We just have them written down in 1840, but they'd already been well in practice long before that. So now this is one I really wanted to walk you through, because I think it shows what we might call today intertribal relations, right? So this is a Sioux-Métis negotiation. So the first thing I want to direct your attention to is the diplomatic language. So look at, before each paragraph, friends, friends, friends. This is a very important thing, because the distinction for Indigenous people is whether you are a friend or an enemy. And if you are a friend, you are part of that all my relations, and you are you're kept close and you are not injured, supposedly. Now, the background to this is that the Métis and the Sioux had a very, very difficult relationship. Peace broke out occasionally, but for the most part, they were pretty much enemies. They tried from time to time, actually repeatedly, to try and make peace, but part of the problem was that with the Sioux in particular, you might make peace with one group of the Sioux, but the others wouldn't feel bound by it. So there are, we have quite a few situations where we know about the Métis and the Sioux fighting. So they become, things are tense, mostly because the Métis are the firm allies of the Ojibwe and the Cree. And the Ojibwe are long old enemies of the Sioux. So the minute the Métis are on that side of the fence, the Sioux treat them as perhaps an enemy or a stranger. You see the language in there. we are now strangers. And they say their young men have been killed. And if you see a little further down, they say, you owe the Sissitu 4 loaded carts. They were our relations. Okay, so this is them, this is the original offer of how to settle the fact that our young men were killed. Okay, but Cuthbert Grant writes back and he tells the story. So we get it in the second paragraph here, where he says, you say your people have been killed. We believe what you say and sincerely regret it. But at the same time, you forget to express your regret that our people were killed also, and they were killed first. You forget to notice that while La Terre qui brûlait and party were in the midst of our friendly camp, smoking the calumet of peace in all confidence and security, your people at that moment were treacherously murdering our friends within sight of that very camp. You forget to mention that our dead were brought into the camp, the bodies yet warm and laid before your eyes. Till then, never did it enter into the head of the heart or the heart of a Red River half-breed to seek in revenge the blood of the Sioux. So now let's just go back again, and you can see what the Sioux say here. Our hearts were not glad when last we left you. That's true, right? Because what happened here with, and what we know happened, is that this is, they're in the camp, they're smoking the peace pipe, which is a hugely important ceremony. So the fact that what's happening is the young men get into a squabble outside and the Sioux kill, and I think it's 4 Métis men. And those are the bodies that are brought in to the camp. The Sioux leave and they're thoroughly embarrassed because this is a breach of all hospitality and protocols, that while you're smoking the peace pipe and you're in a peaceful thing, you're actually, your men are murdering people. That this is a huge, huge breach, right? So the Métis are saying that they're not going to let that go, and they're certainly not going to give them 4 loaded carts. They don't owe you, we don't owe you anything here. So, and again, they're still trying for the diplomatic language, right? Friends, 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 right? Shall we be friends or enemies? Shall there be peace or war, right? So again, signed Cuthbert Grant, chief of the half-breeds and warden of the plains, right? So now we get the letter back. And this is the one of the parts I find quite fascinating. So the first one, friends, your message is now spread before us in council. I don't know how to pronounce these names, so I'll probably butcher them, but Nataiope called for the pipe, and Wananden Kotonmone said no. All the men were then silent, but the women set up a noisy howl outdoors. Nothing was done till they got quiet. The council then broke up. Next day, it was the same. Okay, so the women are the ones who are pressing them to do something here. And so then what you have is the 8 people saying who was killed and saying that they want a replacement, right? This is reparation, restitution, right? I have, you know, the afflicted father of one of the men you killed, wish that he who killed my son should be my son in his stead. And the next one, I have a nephew. He who killed him, I wish to be my nephew. He who pointed the gun at him, I wish to be my son. I wish the brave who killed my brother should be my brother. You killed my brother-in-law, you know, I wish whoever killed him, I wish to be my brother-in-law forever. And the next one, whoever deprived me of his friendship, I wish him to be my friend and cousin. These are heartfelt offerings here coming from the Sioux in order to settle this. And I think it's the women who are saying, no, 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 we're not gonna shut up. We are not in your council, but we're not gonna shut up until you actually make some amends. Now, we don't have any further correspondence here. So, but what we do know, and you'll see the difference, there were 4 Métis men killed in the original skirmish. And here you've got 8 killed. And that is part of the problem, is that they're both wrong now, right? In terms of the order, the accepted order. First of all, the Sioux are wrong for killing, in the wrong, for killing while there's supposed to be a peace pipe being smoked. But then the Métis take revenge, and instead of killing 4, which would have been acceptable exchange, 4 for 4, they killed 8. And so then the Sioux are coming back again, but the Sioux are offering peace here. And so what would have happened after this is Cuthbert Grant would have taken the men who were responsible, they would have met with the Sioux, they would have had a huge ceremony where all of these men, these young people, would have been adopted in as the son, the nephew, the uncle, the brother-in-law, the father. And that would have been the healing between these parties over this time. What I think this shows us is there's a lot to unpack in this story here, way more than I've been able to point out to you, but it shows you a lot about the relationships, about the kind of diplomacy practice. This is not European diplomacy or colonial diplomacy by any means. This is strictly inter-Indigenous diplomacy. So like I said, there's more to be said, and I'd love it if someone would write a whole paper just on that exchange. Now, I wanted to take you briefly through some other documents that I found which show the Métis development of laws. And here we're moving to 1869. So these are notes that are written by Father Richot, and they're difficult. Like I've taken, a snapshot of them with my phones and put them up here so you can see them, but they're really difficult to read. His handwriting isn't easy, but it's also hard to read because he's clearly trying to scribble down while the meetings are happening. He's trying to take notes, and it's all happening really quickly. So sometimes he trails off in the middle of a sentence. Sometimes, the spelling's bad, everything is terrible. Some parts of these have coffee or something spilled on them. They're amazing notes. But basically what we're looking at here is the concept. This is like in the days leading up to, well, we're already in the beginnings of the Red River Resistance. Now, most historians say that began in September when Métis stepped on the surveyor's chain. I beg to differ. I think the resistance started back in July of 1869, and it's always an interesting question, isn't it? Was when does the resistance really begin? And to my mind, it begins when people stop talking about resisting and they actually start taking action. And so what happened in July was that the Métis marked out they had a big meeting. They met a lot. They marked out their territory. I did map it out in the book. Even though there's no map, there was a description of the territory. So I tried to map it out in the book from the description. And they set up patrols and they started patrolling and they started kicking people off who were trying to squat on what they said was Métis territory. And so they kicked them off. They filled in wells. They destroyed any building that had been done. They were making a big statement. I think that's all serious business to fill in somebody's well who spent weeks and weeks probably digging, trying to get to water. So I think that's when the resistance started, was when they set up those patrols. They were meeting all the time and they were actually taking action to remove people from the territory. So stepping on the surveyor's chain is minor compared to the stuff that had already been happening. So what's happening though too is that people are gathering. They're coming from all over the prairies. They're coming from Saskatchewan. They're coming from Alberta. They're coming from the north. They're coming from the United States at that point, and they're gathering in Red River. And so what's happening is they know that they need some way of governance here, because there's just too many people here and they're already taking action. So they have a council meeting in St. Norbert on October 20th, and they really understand that they need to organize the laws of the prairies, right? So according to the culture of the country, meaning their culture, right? Not the colonial culture, right? And that they're going to start this task right away, right? Now, that's basically organizing laws, not just the laws of the hunt, but the other laws. So the laws of the hunt are just one particular aspect of what we're calling the laws of the prairie, right? Because they dealt with all kinds of other things too. It wasn't just the buffalo hunt. They also elected people to council. They did all kinds of governance on the buffalo hunt. So now they're going to take those laws and they're going to codify them. And we see this in the next page here. Again, very difficult to read in French, but basically this is my rough translation, that it was immediately required to proceed with the creation of a code of law of the prairie, so natural, so just, and so wise, to be put into practice and enforced among the Métis of the country, and to extend to any compatriots who would like to join them, so it's voluntary, and would remain in place until a properly authorized superior power arrived to replace the presider of the assemblies of the Métis. Now, this is their fear about rebellion, right? Their fear that if they set up a government, then they're going to be seen as traitors, right? So they're trying to say, okay, it's just going to be we're going to set up these codes of law and we're going to govern here. But what the whole point is to negotiate with Canada the entry of the Northwest, basically 2/3 of what's now Canada, into Confederation. So this is the creation of their code of law. So then what you get is to make known to all the councillors of the people, to conduct the country's governmental affairs, to make laws and ordinances of said according to their judgment for sake of good order. So the second bullet, it's urgent to publish and explain the Code Fondamental, right, directly to the people who find themselves at present gathered in St. Norbert, to have it approved and proclaimed immediately after in order to enforce it as law. And then they're going to advise people to gather on a certain day so that the people, the code of the Métis already known to the people. Okay, so they already know it. That's really interesting, right? And again, that's why I'm saying it's the laws of the prairie that people have already been living by for a long, long, long time. So now these are the back pages and torn pages that I've just got here. But if you look at the end, after the explanation of the laws in the code, the third deliberations were published, adopted, and proclaimed on October 30th. So they met in assembly, they published those laws, they adopted them, and they proclaimed them. And that's quite fascinating to me. And the reason it's fascinating to me is because we don't have them. Like, I was not able to find a copy of those laws. I think they must be somewhere. We must have them. But so far, I haven't been able to find any copies of them. So, and I think this is quite fascinating because up until now, I don't think that anybody had really talked about the laws that the Métis were actually enacting. We talk about the laws of Saint Laurent in 1885, but we didn't talk previously about the fact that there were laws enacted, a Code Fondamental of the Métis in 1869. And my theory is that because Gabriel Dumont was in Red River at this time, I think he took this Métis code and adapted it later in 1885. And we also know there's one in Qu'Appelle. So now I'm never sure whether I'm going to get through this or not. It's already 12:30 your time. So I'm just going to do a couple more things and then I'll probably stop. But this is the list of rights that the Métis demanded of Canada that the Riel's negotiators took to Ottawa. And I think this fifth one is really, really important. So that all properties, rights, and privileges enjoyed by us up to this day be respected, and that the recognition and settlement of customs, usages, and privileges be left exclusively to the decision of the local legislature, right? So this is what they were doing. They didn't want Ottawa's laws to come in and get imposed on them. They wanted their own customs, their own usages, their own privileges. Means the way they use the land, their own laws. That Métis code that we saw has to be considered. And they were banking on the fact that of the 12,000 people in Red River at the time, 10,000 of them were Métis. So they were in the majority. They thought that they could then, with their power as the local legislature, that they could adapt and adopt and include Métis law, customs, and values and governance beliefs into what would be the governance of the country. Now, misplaced trust, it never happened. They got immediately obliterated out of it, but it was that was the idea that Riel was putting forward in 1870. And I don't know that we've got time for more, but as I said, these are the codes that we see elsewhere. Most of these we don't have. We know they existed because we see writings about them, but we don't actually have copies of them, which is a real shame. And again, I think they might be out there. Somebody can maybe find them. The other point I'll say is that they were adopted in ceremony. Like there were assemblies. They took oaths before the priest. They swore on the Bible to abide and enforce their laws, and everybody did that. Everybody abided by that ceremony and participated in the ceremony. So this is not done, it's not done in a back room. It's not just passed somewhere that everybody doesn't know about. It's done in a very public way. And there were probably 700 to 1,000 people gathered in St. Norbert on that October 30th day when they passed it. Now, that's an amazing number, considering, as I said, out of 10,000 people, you have 10,000 Métis in Red River at that time, and you've got 1,000 of them in one place. That's a pretty, we sure don't get turnout like that these days in our elections. So I'm just going to quickly show you some other documents I found about the continuation of this. These are meeting notes from Batoche in 1929. Basically, they're looking to the Manitoba Métis Constitution. And that's really interesting to me. You'll note the name on the bottom is Boyer. There's lots of them around still and you can see they're talking, if you can read French a little bit, there's a little bit about Eugene Caron and going to Prince Albert. So there's some in Saskatchewan content there. And again, we've got in 1932 in Alberta that they are actually forming at this time. This is what leads to the settlements in Alberta. And the last one in Alberta, 1940, again, reaching across. So part of the reason I'm showing you this is because it shows that Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Manitoba Métis are always in communication. They're always moving back and forth. They're always recognizing each other and each other's legal and constitutional rights. And they're looking to each other for models, and they move back and forth all the time. So it's part of what I've been arguing all the way through, that this is a collectivity, a people, a nation of people. And we see the laws here, and I've just given you a brief glimpse into some of the things that I found in the course of writing these two books. So I'm going to stop there, and because I think you wanted some time for questions and answers. So I'm just going to stop with that brief introduction to what is not in either of these books. Thank you, everyone. I really, just before Brent and Jerry, I just wanted to say thank you very much for the opportunity. I had so hoped that we could do this in person. I even had plans to be in Saskatoon. I was so much looking forward to it. And well, maybe another time, but I love Saskatoon, so would have loved to be there.
Thanks, Jean. And thanks very much, Jamie and Dominga, for introducing and moderating the session. An outstanding and vibrant presentation, as usual. And the great challenge, I think, for you, Jean, is that you are held in such high esteem that you're thought of as the font of all knowledge, Métis, and as a result, you could see the wide range of important questions that were being posed to you. It would be nice if this session really could go on for days and you could answer all the questions that the audience had. I also want to extend a thanks to the McKercher law firm, who are the major sponsors of wide-ranging lecture series that we were able to deliver to attendees over the course of each university year. And I also want to extend a special thanks to Gerald Moran, the sponsor of the Wanasway Lecture, and a distinguished Canadian and a distinguished judge and a good friend of the law school. And if I might, Jerry, I might call upon you to say a word beyond our thanks to you, a word from you on the lecture series and Jean's presentation today.
Merci beaucoup, mon ami. Thank you very much, Jean. It's been well worth the two years to wait to hear her speak again in relation because of COVID. But I think the lecture series has gone well over the years and the number of speakers. And I think the type of speakers we've had, including yourself, has been well worth it. And I think my original dream was to hear our Indigenous lawyers and perhaps judges and other friends who work in Indigenous law to speak at this lecture. That was my dream. And I think every time I hear a speaker speaking in this Wanasway lecture, which incidentally means Wanasway means to make law or to make a decision. Yeah. That's what Wanasway means. And so that's why I think I find it extremely important. And I always learn from each and every speaker that we've had. And I've certainly learned from you again today. And in reading your book, I've learned a lot. And I think people often looked at it as what you have said, rebellion, when it was a resistance. And we continue today, and interesting discussions. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gerald. We continue to try our best to live up to your expectations for the lecture series. And we like to think today we have at least met and perhaps exceeded those expectations in Jean's presentation to the audience today. So thanks again. We will be back to you later in the month with a continuing speaker series. But I wanted to extend my thanks to both Ms. Teillet and Gerald Moran as the sponsor, and all of you for having attended.